Hi, my name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor, and I'm on a mission to rebuild and restore this 109-year-old classic sailing yacht, Tally-Ho. Having finished reframing the boat recently, I'm now going to be looking at shaping the centerline timbers and the Rabbet. But before I do that, I just want to double check that the centerline is plumb and level and true, and put some more props in to make sure that it's definitely not moving or going anywhere. So to take the weight of the stem, because I want to take the props out from underneath it, I'm just going to rig up a simple steel wire from the stern post up to the stem, and that'll hold the two ends of the centerline together. Well, it's been a slow start to the week, and that's partly because I've been away for a few days. I went to the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival, and I went off camping for a few days in the mountains on my own, which is a very nice antidote to the busyness of the frame raising. But it's also because I've been spending quite a lot of time trying to source and organise the timber for the next parts of the project. A couple of weeks ago we got in all the timber for the hull planking and the stringers and so on, but I'm not actually going to be able to use that for a little while, and so I'm trying to source timber for the deck structure, that's the beams and the carlins, and also for the deck planks and covering boards. So for the deck structure, which I'm hoping to install before the hull planking, I've got a bit of a choice to make. On the one hand, I could use Oregon oak, otherwise known as Gary oak, which is locally available, but the problem is I'd almost certainly have to buy and install it green, and oak does warp and check quite a bit, which may mean the joinery would open up and get some checking on the beams. The other choice is to use a mixture of western red cedar for the majority of the beams, and then a heavier hardwood for some of the bigger beams. The advantages of this would be that western red cedar is very light, so that would save weight at the top of the hull, which would help stability, especially as I've added some extra weight into the frames with the live oak. And it's also very stable, which means even if I put it in the boat fairly green, it probably wouldn't warp too much. Although it's a softwood, so it's not quite as strong, it is commonly used for deck beams, and they tend to last for a really long time because of the inherent rot resistance of the timber. Using something like Purple Heart for a few of the heavier beams would make sure that there was still enough strength in the deck structure, and so this option is looking pretty favourable to me. The only disadvantage really is that it's not as close to the original timber. Unfortunately, the original deck beams are far too rotten to salvage at all. They got severe iron sickness from the deck plank fastenings. Now the deck plank timber I also want to get as soon as possible because I want to give it enough time to dry out really well before laying the deck. On a traditionally laid deck, it's really important that the wood is very dry because that's going to keep the planks tightly together and help to stop deck leaks. So although I haven't actually made any final orders yet, researching, calculating and making inquiries about these timbers has taken up a lot of time this week already. This week has just been very theoretical and lots of time online and on the phone and poring over books and plans. But I've had enough of that now. I've got to do something, so I'm going to work on shaping the stem. To do that, I have to take the lines of the Rabbet from the lofting floor. Now, the Rabbet on tally-ho is pretty much parallel to the front of the stem, all the way down to fairly near the keel timber. That's good because I can just draw that onto the timbers out there using just a simple gauge rather than having to transfer the lines from the lofting floor onto templates and then onto the boat. So this is the top of the cutwater. Cutwater is the front part of the stem that literally cuts through the water, and when it's finished it's going to be pointed, and this shape at the top of the cutwater is a very traditional shape where it goes from being tapered to being square at the top. On pilot cutters and other very traditional boats, this shape will often be a bit lower down, so there's a more area of the square stem at the top. On yachts it's usually a bit higher. Tally-ho's is quite high, as she was designed and built as a yacht, but it's a little bit lower than some, which is in keeping with her kind of working boat look. So my next job here really is to cut the Rabbet into the stem and the stern post, because that will allow me to fare the frames in properly, and I want to do that on the inside and the outside of the hull so that I can install the bilge stringers and the beam shelves pretty soon. Now, cutting the Rabbet has been slightly complicated by the fact that the timber I've used for the bow assembly is slightly wider than the Rabbet. And after quite a lot of consideration, I've realised that the best way, I think, to do it now is to trim down the top of the stem to its final dimensions, then shape the cutwater roughly, and then I'll be in a better position to actually mark and cut the Rabbet properly where it's supposed to be. The benefit of trimming down the stem head now is that then I'll be able to leave the tensioning wire on it permanently, and I won't have to put big props and jacks underneath the front of the stem, which is fine to do now, but will be more difficult to do after I've shaped the cutwater. Well, this turnbuckle has failed as I was doing it up. It stripped the threads out of the aluminium body, and I should have known it would. I don't know why anyone would make a turnbuckle out of aluminium. So I'm going to go with something a bit more heavy duty. So basically, although I put up the wire cable between the stern posts and the stem earlier in the week, then once I realised the order in which I had to do the work on the stem, I decided the most efficient thing was to actually take that cable off again, just for a little while, and that's when I used the router to just trim down the very top part of the stem. Having done that, I put the cable back onto the top, and then I was able to do it up knowing that I won't have to move it again for quite a while, hopefully. And so the next thing I'm going to do is cut in 1/2 inch deep all the way up the rabbet line. Now I'm not actually cutting the rabbet here, all I'm doing is marking the outside of the rabbet, which is 1/2 inch inside the outside of this bit of timber. So this is a very rough sketch of a cross section of what the stem might look like. And it's not to scale, this is just a rough representation, but the square is what we're starting out with. And this is the rabbet. So the planking will come down and notch into the rabbet on either side here. Now you can see that at this point the outside of the rabbet is inside the outside of the timber. And if I'd started out with a timber that was this size originally, then there would be less area here, which means less room for fastening and a weaker connection. So by starting out with a wider timber, it's going to give me a stronger connection between the centre line and the planking. It just makes it a little bit more complicated to cut the rabbet. This cut here, that 1/2 inch between the outside of the timber and the outside of the rabbet, is the cut that I'm making with the small router. And the next thing I'm going to do is cut the shape of the cutwater, and then at that point it should be easier to actually cut the rabbet itself. So like the forklift, I assess protective equipment on a case-by-case basis. Some of you might have noticed that I don't always wear chainsaw chaps, which are protective trousers which will stop the chainsaw from cutting your legs. In a lot of situations I feel comfortable without them, but if I'm doing a more unusual cut like this one on the stem, and I think there is a reason for me to wear them, then I will. Well, evidently I haven't actually got that much done this week, but these last couple of days when I've actually started physically working again have been very enjoyable and satisfying. Throughout the frame raising, when I was doing a lot of managing, I really missed actually being on the tools. And although I was really pleased with how that went and the progress we made, I've been finding myself more often frustrated than usual. But getting back on the tools and actually physically working has really reminded me why I started doing this in the first place and how much I love it. So I'm really excited to continue shaping the centerline. For now though, thanks a lot for watching, and a massive thank you to everyone who's donated or otherwise supported the Tally-Ho project. It makes a huge difference and it means I'm able to take the time to make and edit these videos, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.